Right, apparently I'm live. Yes, I am. It is me, Jarena Shooting Star, and I am back with another blog. Right, so today I want to talk about patriarchy, where it originates from, where we see it right now. I've just been thinking, basically, I think patriarchy is Western culture. It comes from the Western hemisphere, as well as Asian culture. But they do like to make it sound like patriarchy is sort of African or Indian, but really it's not. You have to sort of flip it around because I honestly believe that patriarchy is a Western North nation culture. Oh my god, I just heard something outside. Hold on. What the hell is that noise? What the hell is that? Right. Sorry to interrupt you guys. Um, as I was saying, patriarchy is very much a Western thing. And if you see the countries that were occupied by Western countries, I feel like patriarchy has influenced those countries. For example, in the UK or anywhere in Europe, I feel like the women don't really have as much rights as they say they have. They're given this information that, yeah, women have rights, but really they don't. The women do not have as much rights. It's because it's not a matriarchal society, it's a patriarchal society. But yet they would like to go on like their women have amazing rights. I mean, I must have read an article and it was written by an American woman who was writing about women's lives in Africa. She particularly chose an East African country, and me being from that culture, she wrote a very, oh, I'm so glad I'm American because women in that country have it so hard. Oh, they suffer. And it's just like, she was almost like comparing herself and sort of gloating, and some society makes it sound like people, like the women in Africa, don't have rights, or they're downtrodden, or they're seen as second class citizens. That is not right. Naturally, African societies are matriarchal. Like there's a strong female bond. Like it's the female that holds the culture together. It's the female that passes culture. It's the female that really runs the country, really. And if it does appear matriarchal or women don't have rights, that's because of colonization, which is colonized by Western nations. So they have influenced their culture onto African. I can give you an example. For example, black men in Western countries, in England and or America, they appear like assholes because they are living in a patriarchal society. So they are taking on that culture to be complete idiots towards their own black women. And that's because they are in a patriarchal society. It's because of the environment they're in. But naturally, that's not, black culture from Africa is not patriarchal, it's matriarchal. That's why it's a complete, like, I see it as like a sin of all sins to insult women, because that's not your culture. Your culture is not to disrespect women. You're supposed to protect them and hold them to high regard. That's the natural environment your culture should be. So I just felt I need to say this because There's a lot of confused black men who are on social media insulting, their own race, black women, telling them how, you know, feminism has destroyed the family, blah, blah, blah. And just there is a lot of hate from these so called confused black men that live in the Western world, whether it's America, whether it's in the UK. The things they talk about just doesn't make sense. And it just made me think if they were in a matriarchal society such as Africa, they wouldn't speak like that. They wouldn't even think like that. So, what is it that's making these men act like this? It's definitely a patriarchal system that's making them act like this. It's not their natural behavior, but because of they're living in a patriarchal society, they are something about them living in this patriarchal society makes them anti-black women. And as another blogger suggested, the misogyny and all that, that's because they're living in a patriarchal society as well as and this patriarchal society does not like black women because they naturally are from a matriarchal society. So who do they fear? The women. So I honestly believe that's the problem. And I can also mention, if you look at the Arab world, it's the same thing. The Arabs in the Middle East that are there now, originally, if you look at their DNA, they come from Asia or they come from Europe. They're a mixture of both. So they brought their patriarchal culture to the Middle East, and the black Arabs moved to Africa. So these black Muslims that we see, who still have a very strong matriarchal society, like the Somalians and the Yemenis, and so the women in Africa generally, they do have a very strong and that's because of their natural society, even though their religion, in fact, so women do have a lot of power in the African countries, the but because of the power base changing to the lighter Western, the lighter Asian and European Arabs that are currently living in the Middle East, they brought their patriarchal culture and changed the religion to see women as lesser than men. And that's got nothing to do with the religion, but that's because of the society they come from, which is very patriarchal. So when you look at it, the only, matriarchal societies are in Africa and in the dark parts of India where the women still hold a strong power, like the Tamils, or the dark Philippines and those nations. It's very much a black culture that it's a matriarchal society, and I feel like these black men in Europe or America are fighting the natural patriarchal culture of our people by turning on black women because they're almost being used as pawns by the patriarchal society, you know, to destroy black women. And I just sat here thinking about it, and I'm thinking, we live in a patriarchal society in the Western world, and that's the same thing with, with the Christianity. A lot of, black people, they're into were very westernized Christianity, where it sees women as lesser than men and they should obey their husbands and all this. So again, that religion has been very heavily dominated by Western white people, and that's why the European Christianity is a very patriarchal, because it's not the truest form of Christianity, which is, very matriarchal and very much linked to Hebrew. So that influence, that patriarchal culture was instilled in the religion when it was spread around the world through colonialism. So they also spread patriarchy. And so I just thought I'd mention that because, you know, true African culture is a matriarchal society, and that means that the women are actually the ones running things from time ago. And if you look at these countries where, at the parliament it's just all men sitting there, that's not right. That's not the way it's supposed to be, because, you know, they're just being the women are being silenced or being told not to come. And I feel like that's a very Western patriarchal neo-colonialism agenda being pushed on those nations to encourage patriarchal culture. And we know that, and basically the more that they can influence patriarchal culture, then the more control they can have over a people if the women are silenced and don't have any power. So that's just my point of view. I thought I'll talk about that. Um, what else was I going to talk about? Yeah, and I also want to talk about, today I spoke to this Portuguese lady, well, Brazilian lady, and she explained to me that, you know, in her country they speak Portuguese, because the Portuguese are the ones that moved to Brazil. And she mentioned that when the Portuguese came to South America, Brazil, they came there with African slaves. Now, if you research history, Portugal, like 500 years ago, had a big black community, like literally, it was almost like part of Africa, Portugal and Spain. So these are the Moors, like the Africans, North Africans, they just literally, were stationed in Spain and Portugal. Now, this heavily black community, all of a sudden, like when Portugal was discovered, South America was discovered, all the African blacks were taken from Portugal and they were sent to Brazil to work as slaves. But what a lot of people don't know is that, Portugal had a very heavy black community, a lot, literally. They were stationed there. And if you look at the people now, ones in Portugal, some have really curly hair, some are really dark, but yeah, it was literally a North African empire with Portugal that was included in it. So I just thought I'd mention that because I think that's a lot of. I feel like a lot of people don't know about that. They just think, oh, Spain and Portugal are always, white and completely European. But if you ask any Spanish person or any Portuguese person, they know that the Black Moors from Africa completely dominated that region. But for some reason, during slavery, all those black people were sent to the Caribbean, to the Spanish South America. So they were literally exported and sent there. So, I mean, but in the order, I think that they were sent initially. They were sent to West Africa, and from West Africa they were sent to South America to work as slave and as African Americans to work as slaves in America. But a lot of people don't also realize is that there was a lot of slave raiding, like in terms of the two powers, the Spanish and the British, taking over slave ships. So when they took over a slave ship, the Americans will take the slave ship. So they used to raid each other's ships midway in the Atlantic Ocean. So yeah, I just thought that was a bit of an interesting thing I should mention. Yeah, so what else should I talk about? Oh, sorry, it's just been really random. Um, and yeah, so I am Mr. Arena Shooting Star. I am back with another blog, and I hope you like it. Bye.